The Amazon rainforest has an abundance of life in its truest form. It's a true natural wonder of the world. It's most known to be a dense and expansive jungle, but less so for its dark history. All of this can also be said of the Fakahatchee Strand in the Florida Everglades, which is exactly why it's called the Amazon of North America. After a bit of research, I knew I had to see this for myself, so I began the 2-hour drive across the Everglades to the Fakahatchee Strand. The thing is, I'm one of those people who somehow manages to make a 2-hour drive take 4. In other words, I'm easily distracted, so there were some pit stops on the way. The first pit stop made my socks wet. And the second pit stop was really just a disappointment. Came all the way out here just to figure out it's just picnic tables. The third pit stop though was actually kind of cool. Empty sign and a gate in the middle of nowhere. That's pretty cool. This is an education area. Once I actually got into the park, I was immersed in another world. Even the drive itself was an adventure. We had to stop because there was a tree that needed to be cut down. The Jane Scenic Drive was named after 3 brothers who farmed tomatoes here. Eventually it became a railroad for logging, but nowadays it serves a better purpose. It's a perfect introduction to the park where you can drive through pine forests, cypress domes, and even wet prairies. There's a lot to see, and you might even see a gator right on the roadside. There's like a branch on this gator's head here. I'm wondering if somebody put it there or what. But of course my mind got the best of me once again, and I had to make one more pit stop before reaching the main trail. But this one wasn't a mistake in the slightest. What first caught my eye was this little wooden structure, but what really made this pit stop worth it was the hike that was just beside it. I began on this trail, and it immediately became clear why this park was so special. Even though I had done my research on the Fakahatchee Strand, I was still surprised by the biodiversity and how enchanting these jungles were. To read about it is one thing, but to actually be here, exploring deeper into the subtropical Strand swamp, was something else. This honestly was supposed to just be a quick pit stop, but this trail is incredible. It's one of the coolest trails I've ever been on in all of Florida, for sure. I've never seen anything like this. But I'm gonna continue on. Just here we have a little water crossing. Hopefully I don't fall in. We'll see. It was immediately apparent to me how important the water was to these lush environments. But it really makes sense because it's linked to the Everglades and all of the water that it provides. So as I ventured deeper into the Fakahatchee Strand, I became aware that just like the real Amazon, there was an abundance of opportunities to see a number of native and rare plant and animal species. But I also thought of the area's dark history, and if you look closely, you might even see remnants of the logging that terrorized this swamp for many years. Aside from what I saw on the info boards at the entrance of the park, one thing that stuck out to me as a reminder of the history of logging here was the royal palms that towered over the other trees. During the logging operations from the early 1900s to early 1950s, the royal palms were actually spared. Instead, the bald cypress trees were decimated for their resistance to rotting, water, and termites.
Stretching for many miles in the state of Florida are the great cypress swamps of the Everglades. Though insect-ridden and treacherous with quicksand, they're a valuable source of a valuable commodity, cypress lumber, especially important today in view of the shortage of housing material. Lumbermen braving the almost impenetrable swamps must first build a railroad to get the logs out. Axes and saws bit into trees 2,000 years old, and 20 tons at a time, the cypress come crashing down. Working often in water hip deep, the loggers provide huge quantities of lumber a year. Riding across the swamp, the tough, rot-proof cypress heads for the lumber mill, 28 carloads at a time. The world's most difficult logging operation provides lumber for badly needed homes.
I was able to dig up an article from 1948 where a logging superintendent speaks on the operations that were going on in this area. He spoke about the strength and the age of the cypress trees, claiming that a tree aged somewhere between 500 and 750 years isn't actually that old compared to the rest of the populations. These trees were ancient, making their decimation even more of a shame. He went on to speak about how thick the jungle was. I can attest to this as well. I experienced this firsthand, albeit over 70 years after this article was written. The most significant operations began in 1944 and came to an end altogether in the early 1950s. The land was then purchased and sold off in segments to out-of-state citizens who were scammed into believing that they could actually build on these lots. It quickly became apparent that it was impossible to build here. And believe it or not, some of these private lots still exist within the park's boundaries, and they're called inholdings. I can't help but think of how similar this is to the Amazon, where people try to build here and they just can't. Nowadays, the park has recovered from its rough history, although it's still incomparable to what it once was. Now that I was more than pleased with my final pit stop, I was ready to continue to the main trail. And of course, I had to pretend that I was shocked that it was getting late and I was in a race to not only get on the main trail, but also to see the old cabin that I had planned on seeing. I opted to bike the trail for the sake of time, but it still seemed I wasn't fast enough to beat the setting sun. Wow, look at this. If I can't make it to the end, I think I'll be okay. Just for this little piece of the trail right here. It's just unreal. Let's keep trying, but it's getting pretty late. Just as I was about to give up, the old cabin came into view. Look at that. I assumed this was here just as a relic, but it turns out that this was one of those inholdings that I was talking about. One of the part owners explained that they take trips a few days at a time in the winter, and I happened to be there just at that time.
It's a wintertime getaway place that we own. Been here a long time.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, it's pretty cool. It was built in 1957 as a hunting cabin, and it has miraculously stayed mostly put after all of the hurricanes. This seemed to be sheer luck, but it was also in part to the owner's efforts to keep the cabin standing. You don't mind if I go in the dock right there? Appreciate it. One storm even moved the cabin entirely. Eventually, this dock was built as an extension to the cabin, and watching the sunset here was a perfect end to my day in the Amazon of North America.